Hi everyone, my name is Tiffany Zhang, and I'm the founder and host of Undocumented History and online YouTube video podcast. Welcome to episode 9. The fastest growing ethnic group in America is Asian Americans, yet they're the least contacted group by both political parties. Perhaps it is because of a perpetuating cycle, that because they are the least contacted, they are less likely to vote, and therefore political parties are less inclined to reach out to them. In this interview, Lily, Trieu, and I will be discussing the uniqueness of Texan Asians, how to mobilize AAPI voters, and why Asians are the least contacted group by both political parties. Here is my conversation with her. Hi everyone, and welcome to Undocumented History, an online video podcast focused on educating others about Asian culture and history, while also amplifying Asian voices and stories. I'm Tiffany Zhang, your host, and today we have a very special guest, Lily, the co-founder and executive director of Asian Texans for Justice, a nonprofit organization that connects the AAPI Texans to civic action. Thank you so much for being here today, Lily, and taking the time to join me. Before we start, is there anything else that you want to add regarding to what you do and who you are?
No, I think that was a fantastic introduction, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. So I guess my first question would be, as a co-founder, I guess like what kind of inspired you to found Asian Texans for Justice? Was there like a personal experience or an event that happened?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think if you had asked me when I was in college if I thought I would ever be a co-founder of a nonprofit, I would have been like, you're out of your mind. Like I didn't know the first thing about nonprofits. So most of my career has been pretty traditional. I worked in the business world for almost 10 years. And after I did that, I went back to grad school and I was ended up working at a nonprofit, but I'd never considered starting my own nonprofit. And so the reason why I helped to co-found Asian Texans for Justice was actually because of what happened during COVID. And so I think a lot of folks know is in 2020 when COVID first broke out across the world, we started to see a lot of headlines of an increased rate of attacks and violence against Asian Americans. And honestly, not just Asians here in the US, but Asians all across the globe were starting to see attacks. And that was something really unsettling for me because I think a lot about the people who were being attacked. It was mostly folks who were elderly, who were doing just everyday activities. And it made me think of people like my parents and my grandparents. And so we wanted to do something to help fight back and to help advocate for our community. And that's really what started our work at Asian Texans for Justice. So it's kind of by accident, but something that we feel really passionately about.
Definitely. I feel like the pandemic did shift a lot of, I guess, like not just Asians in general, but also Americans in general, like their perception. Because I feel like before, like we did, like Asian hate had always existed. I feel like it's just that the pandemic kind of deepened it or like made more Americans aware of it. So, yeah. And I guess like going off of your organization, I guess can you kind of talk about your organization, Asian Texans for Justice, and like the type of things and events that y'all do?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Asian Texans for Justice, we are a statewide 501(c)(3) nonprofit. So, we're nonpartisan. We don't support political candidates. We don't support political parties. We really are here to support the Asian American and Pacific Islander Texans who live in the state. And so, there are actually more than 1.9 million of us in Texas. Texas has the third largest population of AAPIs after California and New York. So, a lot of times we think about AAPIs as only living on the coast when in reality, a lot of us are living in other places as well. So what we do at ATJ is we connect Asian Americans to civic action. So when we say civic action, we're really talking about a wide range of things. It's about voting. It's about advocacy, right? So, for example, Stop Asian Hate is an advocacy program, right? We are advocating for more resources. We're advocating for more awareness to the issue of anti-Asian violence and discrimination. We also do beyond that, civic action to us is building leadership skills. And so we have a youth development program that help young people understand how they can be more civically engaged in their communities. And we also work with other organizations all across the state and all across the country, whether they're AAPI serving or otherwise, so that we can work together to advocate towards common goals and shared goals like racial equity and social justice.
hmm And this was something I was really interested in because when I was like doing research and stuff, I guess like before in your 2022 annual report, I guess like the number of people the organization had reached was very like astonishing to me. Like there, I saw the numbers like 4 million digital impressions, 190,000 AAPI voters contacted. I guess like how did you manage to achieve that? And I guess like do you have any advice for people also trying to mobilize Asian voters?
Yeah, I think these big numbers are always really like exciting, but when you look at digital impressions, it's really easy to get digital impressions, right? You run an ad, you pay for an ad, you look at these big numbers of hundreds of thousands of people being reached out to. Those numbers look really big. But if you talk to people who do organizing work on a regular basis, and you talk to people who want to just get their family or to get their friend group to go and maybe go vote in an election, usually the most effective way of doing that is actually through one-on-one contact. It's actually through you telling your parents, come with me to the polls, or is you telling your friends, hey, let's all go and vote together on Friday. That's actually way more impactful than what we do. So what we do is we run digital ads. We send direct mailers. We might text bank or phone bank, right? So during election season, when people get a bunch of text messages being like, have you gone and voted yet? That's us too, right? We do that as well. And all of those things are helpful, right? Sometimes you forget there's an election. So if you get a mailer or if you get a text message, you're like, oh, that's right, there's an election this year. But they don't always spur action, right? Sometimes people just get annoyed and they're like unsubscribe. So the thing that's actually most helpful is what we call relational organizing, which is you reaching out to people in your family, in your friend group, in your own personal network, people who know you and who trust you, and you encouraging them to vote and you telling them why it's important. To be honest, that's actually way more impactful than what we do, right? What we do is to just try to remind people this is happening, but we really count on people who care to actually mobilize their own community to get out and take action.
And this is kind of, I guess, not exactly related to the question before, but I guess like, is there a reason why you decided to found an organization specifically for Asians in Texas and not just like, I guess like generally the country?
Yeah, of course. I think when you think about the experiences in Texas, there are some things that are really unique to being an Asian American in Texas. That's different in different places, right? Because, Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, we are Americans just like everyone else. We are immigrants, right? Just like everyone else who came to America, with the exception of Indigenous people, right? We're all immigrants. And so if you think about the way Asian Americans in Texas live versus, let's just say, our neighbors are the Asian Americans who live in Louisiana, we have different experiences. In Texas, it's probably more likely if you're Asian American that you're eating breakfast tacos. It's probably likely that you're eating barbecue. It's probably likely that you've been to a rodeo, right? Rodeo maybe in Houston or San Antonio or Dallas, right? Whereas in Louisiana, if you're Asian American, you're probably not doing those same things. If you're in Louisiana, you're maybe eating more traditional Southern food, or maybe you're eating more traditional Cajun food. And so I use that as an example to say, not all Asian Americans across the country share the same experience. Where we live, the community in which we work and engage with, that determines what our lived experience looks like. And Asian Americans in Texas, we deserve to have a nonprofit advocate for our rights, specifically here in Texas, because the state government here in Texas is really powerful. They pass a lot of laws, some laws that help us, some laws that don't. And it is important that here in the state, we do have a voice, right, to really be able to advocate for our needs. And one last thing I'll say is one of the reasons why we didn't want to create something national is because there are actually a ton of amazing national organizations that already exist, right? Whereas in Texas, there really has not been a pan API nonprofit that serves the state of Texas. So we really wanted to go into a place where there wasn't already someone doing the work.
Definitely. I think obviously having an organization concentrated in a state would obviously, I feel like it would be more effective than having like one nationwide organization having like chapters located. I feel like it's just good to have like one, like I guess kind of branch focused on the state. And obviously, as you said, there are 1.9 or like 2 million Asians in Texas. This is
Yeah.
clearly not a monolith. I feel like that is obviously like within the AAPI community, there is incredible diversity within Asians. I guess like how do you think Asians in Texas kind of work together as Asians? And I know you talked about this before in your previous question, but like what do you think is like unique to Asians who live in Texas when comparing them to other Asians in the country?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I think about how the Asian American and Pacific Islander community come together, it's like a big dysfunctional family, right? like your family, you guys all want the same things, but you're probably fighting sometimes, you're probably bickering sometimes, or maybe some competition between cousins or whatever. That's kind of how I see it when I think about how the AAPI community in Texas works. And I think that's the thing that makes our community unique, but also makes working together challenging. It's how diverse we are. So our community is made up of over 50 different ethnicities. We speak over 100 different languages. We represent dozens of different religions. So naturally, we're not going to all agree on everything all the time, right? And that's okay. And I think the thing that we really need to really understand is, how did we all get here? And so one of the things that I always say is that APIs, we've come to this country and to the state at different times in different ways and for different reasons. So my parents were Vietnamese refugees. And so they were actually boat people. They actually had to leave Vietnam on a boat, right, fleeing warfare. That experience is very different than, say, a more recent immigrant who maybe came from India to get their PhD and want to contribute to research and, to progress and innovation. Those experiences are just very different. And if your experiences are different, your perspective on things will also probably be a little different. And so what we really try to focus on is, okay, what are all of the things that we do agree on? And let's bring everyone together on those things. And I think some of the most basic things we all agree on is we all agree that Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders deserve representation, right? That we should not be invisible, that we should not be ignored. I think that's something that most folks agree with. I think most folks agree that discrimination and racism is bad, right? And so that's really how we hone in on the working together aspect, right? I think what makes Texas unique, and it's not just Texas, it's a lot of states in the South, is that the Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders who live in this area, most of us are newer immigrants. When you look at places like California and New York, a lot of them have Asian Americans who've been here since the early 1900s, right? Who've been here over 100 years. They're like fourth, fifth, sixth generations in their family who've been in the US. A lot of people down south aren't the same, right? States like Texas are just newer, younger. We just haven't been a part of the United States for as long. A lot of Asian Americans who live here came in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and even now more recently. So we don't have as many families that are fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth generation Asian American. So there's a cultural dynamic that's really different, which is what I think makes our Chinatowns in Texas really amazing, or our Asia towns really amazing, right? There's still a really deep connection to heritage and culture back home in the mainland.
Definitely. I live in Houston, so I'm Asian in Texas, and I feel like I can kind of agree with you on that because I feel like in the South, like a lot of the, I guess like Asian families I know, I feel like they are more recent immigrants. I feel like I don't see as much as like fourth, fifth, and sixth generation people as you were saying, and I feel like that really is true. I feel like it, even though like all Asians, like obviously each community within the Asian community doesn't think the same. And I feel like that shouldn't prevent us from like uniting. It should actually, I don't know, like it shouldn't prevent us from uniting. Like we can still be united over things, as you said, like Asian diversity and stuff. And yeah. So my next question would be like, according to the Asian Texans for Justice's annual report, I saw like on the report only 20% of the AAPI community feels that their interests are being represented in government. I guess like why do you think that percentage is so low, and what can we kind of do to change that?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question. So right now in Texas, the AAPI community, we make up about 6.6% of the state's population. So it's still a pretty small percentage. However, we are the fastest growing racial group in Texas. So I always say small but mighty. But because we're such a small percentage of the population, what ends up happening is when you look at our elected officials, whether they're local, like city council, mayors, or even go looking higher, like state level, whether it's our governor or those in the Texas legislature, they really focus in on representing the people who vote, right? Because their job is to stay in office. They want to get reelected. So when they're thinking about how to pass policy and when they're thinking about how to, vote on certain bills and proposals, they're thinking about, okay, if I vote yes or no on this bill, how is that going to affect my ability to be reelected? With Asian Americans only being about 6.6% of the population, and historically, we're not turning out to vote in droves, it means that a lot of elected officials are not incentivized to represent us. So if you listen to debates, most of the times when people debate policy, they don't talk about how policies will impact Asian Americans. They talk about how it's going to impact older people or younger people or the white community or the Black community or the Latinx community, but very rarely do they talk about the Asian American community. And so I think because no one ever talks about us, it leads our community to feel invisible, and it feels like we're not being represented. And unfortunately, that perpetuates the cycle, because if you feel like you're not represented, then you're not going to feel motivated to vote. And if we don't vote, elected officials won't feel motivated to represent us, right? So it's kind of this perpetual cycle, which is why it is so important we vote every election. If we demonstrate that we have the power to influence elections, I think that's really going to help incentivize elected officials, regardless of their race and their background. It'll incentivize them to make sure they represent us.
Definitely. Also, I think, I don't know, this was kind of like what I kind of how I thought about it. So I know that for, I guess, like kind of a notion about Asian Americans is that they will always be foreigners. And I feel like that kind of played into, I guess, like the like just like not thinking about Asian Americans when like passing a bill or like making laws, because I feel like when you think about American society, you don't, or like the people you're serving, I guess like you don't really think about Asian Americans, because like as you said, like even though Asian Americans are the fastest growing racial group, like I guess 6% may not seem a lot, or like might not be a lot to some politicians making bills and stuff. And as you said, like I think it really is important to change that. And I know like during the 2020 election, Asians, like their voter turnout increased from, I think it was like they had a higher voter turnout than they usually did, which I think is good. And it's kind of a sign that Asians are breaking the cycle.
Yeah, absolutely.
And my next question would be, going off of kind of like voting and API, like why do you think that Asians are the least contacted group by either political party? And again, like how do you think we should change that?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's something that we talk a lot about as an organization. So, like I said earlier, the best way to get people to vote is for you to ask your friends, your family, your network to go vote, right? The
Mhm.
next best way to get people to go out to vote is for political parties and candidates to do direct outreach, right? Like if someone is running to be your city council member, they should reach out to you personally and they should tell you why you should vote for them, right? They should earn your vote. And what we're seeing is in the system, regardless of which political party, whether they're Republican or Democrats, consistently candidates are not reaching out to the API community. And I think it's for a number of reasons. I think one, there is this misconception that API voters are apathetic and they don't care. So this idea that, oh, that community doesn't care, I'm not going to waste my time going to reach out to them, which our studies have shown is inaccurate. Our studies have shown that the majority of people do care, just no one's reaching out to them, right? I think that's one issue. I think a second issue is that a lot of candidates, even if they want to reach out to API voters, they're confused. They don't, for the most part, they're not API candidates, right? So they don't always know what are the issues AAPIs care about. They don't always know, like I'm from Houston too. Like in Houston, there are pockets where the majority of people speak Vietnamese. There are pockets where the majority of people speak Chinese. There are pockets where they speak maybe Korean or they speak English. A lot of times candidates don't know what they're walking into. They don't know what issues they care about and they don't want to say the wrong things. They don't want to be offensive. They don't know if they need interpreters, which is why a lot of candidates honestly need to hire more diverse staff members, right? If you have a staff member who's from the area, who identifies as being API, they can help you navigate that. Also, elected officials and candidates should be building those relationships year round. They should not only be reaching out to our community when they want our votes, they should be reaching out to our community all the time, okay? Because if you're doing that work all the time, then when it comes time for an election, you should know who the community leaders are. You should know what issues that community cares about, and you should know what your talking points should be. So what we try to do at Asian Texans for Justice is we try to educate the community, both the elected officials and the candidates who are running, as well as our own community members, to say, hey, you've been ignored. You should not be ignored. These are the issues that really we should all be talking a lot more about.
And kind of going off of that, kind of pivoting to, I guess, the education system. I guess like why do you think that Asian American history isn't represented in America's curriculum?
That is a great question. I think in most public schools, we don't teach history in a way that's inclusive. And that's not just Asian American history, that's Black history, that's Latinx history, Mexican American history. We just don't teach history that includes everybody, right? The way we teach history kind of hasn't changed in the last, 40, 50, 60 years. We teach it the same way. And I think as the community is starting to recognize it, right? Like I think about my education system. I grew up in public education in Texas. I didn't learn a single thing about Asian American history growing up. And I think that's why people see Asian Americans as foreigners, right? Because in their heads, they're like, oh, well, Asian Americans aren't from here. They're from China or India or some other country. They don't realize that Asian Americans have been in this country for hundreds of years, and that we have contributed to the makeup of this country. And so I think it's not represented because, like I said, our curriculum just right now is not designed to be inclusive. It's not representative because the teachers in the classroom, they themselves likely never learned it, right? So if they never learned it, and they don't know to teach it. And I also think our community historically has not been fighting for it. And I think this moment has shifted, right? I think this is a moment now where all across the country, young people, parents, community organizers, and leaders are all demanding and wanting our history to be told.
Kind of going back to that I guess like foreignness that people view Asians with. I think, I guess like America kind of thinks they have a certain like vision of what American history should be. And I think that definition of American history doesn't include Asian Americans because, as you said, like Asian Americans can be seen as foreign or like not from here when like Asian Americans are in fact Americans. And yeah, like as you said, like in my world history AP class, like we never really learned about Asian history either. It's mainly just like World War II, like Japanese Americans, and also like Chinese Exclusion Act. Like there wasn't really anything, I guess, like more. I guess it's kind of recent, but like more, like like more current times. And I think, as you said before, like if a teacher isn't taught Asian American history, then they won't feel that they have to, and it kind of just like creates a cycle.
Absolutely.
And I guess, how do you think that we should change this like lack of diversity in education systems?
I think it's really hard. I think if you look at the way the education system is in Texas, the reality is that teachers are underpaid, they're overworked, students are really stressed out. There's a lot of testing. There's in the last few years have also been really hard because you look at COVID and how it's impacted the school system. I think a lot of folks are worried about mental health. I think students are really struggling with having resources to battle stress, anxiety, mental health issues, school safety issues, with like guns and shootings. And I think all of those things make it really hard for people to want to be a teacher. It makes it really hard for people to want to go into education, right? To know that in any given moment you may be shot in the classroom, or to know that your students might not be fed at home or might be dealing with an anxiety attack. And you're trying to do all of this and teach and administer the STAR test and knowing you're probably underpaid as a teacher. So I would say, we want more diversity in the classrooms and we want more diversity in our curriculum. We really have to invest in education as if we really believe it to be the solution, right? It means we have to pay teachers better. It means we have to fund schools. It means we need to take mental health and school safety seriously, because those are the basic things that need to exist. And at the same time, we also need to advocate for curriculum that actually represents the student body. And the best people to advocate that are the students themselves, right? Because at the end of the day, what you guys are learning is going to impact the rest of your lives and your rest of your careers. So really advocating for inclusive curriculum should be led by students, and it should be student voices. And really, I think students of color should come together and demand representative history and representative curriculum altogether, right? Because this is not an Asian battle or a Black battle or a Latinx battle. This is really everybody. Everybody should be represented. We should be learning about how everybody played a role in shaping our country. So I think these are like big, complex problems that we need to solve for, but I really do think the movement should be led by students.
hmm Sometimes I feel like students have a misconception that, I guess, their voices aren't that powerful or they aren't that loud because I feel like they feel like they're not the one directly in control, like they're not the ones like directly making the curriculum or anything. But I feel like that is honestly like kind of wrong because I feel like students do have a lot of power. I feel like students may be like the most powerful voice because they are the ones that are actually learning it, like they kind of have a say in it. And I know you talked a little bit about mental health for the AAPI or just like mental health in general. I guess my next question would be, can you like kind of talk about mental health and what that looks like for the AAPI community? Because I feel like Asian culture, I guess like kind of has a mindset of like trying not to like rock the boat or anything. I guess like how might this mindset create suppression and conflict within individuals and then added with like coupled with the lack of diversity?
Yeah, that's a really big and complicated issue is mental health in the API community. So one of the things that I always share with people, because people I think just don't realize it, is when you look at the leading cause of death for youth in the United States, the leading cause of death is gun violence. That is the number one reason why young people are killed and die in the US. The exception is actually in the API community. The API community is the only community where that is not true. In the AAPI community, the leading cause of death is suicide, which tells us that we know that in the AAPI community for young people, mental health is a growing concern and is alarming. And to your point, because of cultural backgrounds, because of social norms in our community, talking about mental health can be a taboo. Which means that for a lot of young people who grow up in API households, it means they're probably not getting the mental health care they need, right? Whether it's having access to a therapist or whether it's having access to medication, they're probably not getting that at home, right? Because they're probably not talking about it at home. And unfortunately, in Texas, we are ranked as one of the worst states in terms of getting access to mental health, which means that if you're a young person in school, there's probably also a big likelihood that you're also not getting mental health services in schools. Oftentimes it's because the counselor to student ratio is really, really bad, right? Usually in a school, every counselor has 300 students that they're managing, right? And so just every student's not getting the type of care they need. So what we try to do to talk about mental health is two things. We advocate for more investments in mental health, specifically in school. How do we get more social workers, counselors, therapists in schools so that API students are getting that help when they go to school? The other thing we're trying to advocate for is in the healthcare area. How do we expand access to health insurance? How do we expand access to programs like Medicaid and Medicare so that people in our community, because we know API communities love Medicaid and Medicare, but how do we create better benefits in Medicaid, Medicare so that APIs, if they want to, they are covered to see a therapist, they are covered to be able to address their mental health concerns.
Hmm. And I think there's also kind of a lack of API providers, which I think can also cause more stress because I feel like if you're dealing with, I guess, like lack of diversity or like something specific to, I guess, like kind of the culture of AAPI, like I feel like you kind of need another AAPI therapist or provider, but because there's a lack of AAPI providers, that might also kind of, I don't know, like be worse. And also
Yeah.
something that like also I know that the AAPI community is also the least likely to seek mental health, and I feel like that isn't because like they have the least mental health problems. It's because that it's, I don't know, like it's kind of like I guess the culture not to like rock the boat or anything. And I feel like that also might kind of add to this because like just because you're okay doesn't, or just because you're not saying anything doesn't mean you're like not okay. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Of course. Absolutely. I fully agree.
and then kind of just to like end this interview off, can you please tell us about the Civic Engagement Fellowship Program?
Yeah, of course. So it's actually one of our favorite programs at Asian Texans for Justice. It is a 10-week program that we run every summer that's targeted towards API youth who live in Texas. And so API youth who are ages between the ages of 16 and 24 who live in Texas, who care about civic engagement, who care about community and leadership work, are welcome to apply. And then over the course of the summer, over the course of those 10 weeks, we provide trainings every week. The trainings are on a variety of different topics. It could be about the API identity. It could be about organizing. It could be about building relationships with different partners. And then over the course of those 10 weeks, Our fellows will pick a topic of their own choice, whatever they are most passionate about, and they will work on a project and they will actually execute on that project over the course of those 10 weeks. So examples of things we've done is we had a fellow this past summer who hosted a Know Your Rights town hall for immigrants, right? So that they know as an immigrant in the US, what are their rights? We had a fellow build a free AAPI library in their community because they live in a community where there are not very many Asian Americans. So they want their community to learn more about Asian American history, representation. So they built a little free library box that they put up in their community. They got donations, they filled it up with some amazing books, and it's now servicing the community. So everybody kind of can pick their own project and execute it over the course of those 10 weeks. You receive a stipend, and you also get to meet one another and build these really great relationships with other youth all across the state. And so far we've just been so proud of all of our fellows, who go through, and they always have just these amazing projects. And like I said, it's a summertime program, and so usually folks are out of school. But it's something that, for folks who are interested, you can apply in the spring. And we're always recruiting for new fellows.
Mhm. That sounds like such a great program. I really like all those projects. Sounds really interesting. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on, Lily. Thank you so much. It was so great talking to you. And I hope everyone at home watching is having a good time. And thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.